Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Imperial Diecast. Welcome to the new year, by the way, and in this year I've decided to branch out a little bit when it comes to collecting diecast. I've been running my channel for almost 5 years now, and so far I've only collected diecast cars. But recently I have developed an interest in aviation, and so today I'm going to take you back on a journey to my childhood. We're going to travel more than 20 years back in time to give you an idea of what kind of diecast planes were available in the late 90s and early 2000s, especially for kids. You see, when I was 7 or 8 years old and I went shopping with my mom, we used to come across a section in the store that had these planes. And I believe back in the day, these planes costed something like 6 or 7 euros a piece, which was not cheap, because for just a little bit more, back in the day, you could already collect an old generation Herpa model, which had a lot better detail than these planes that I'm about to show you. However, this was what the kids section had back in the 90s, and of course, as a young kid, I really didn't care much about details, but what I did care about was the amazing liveries of all the various national carriers. I used to travel a lot when I was a kid, and I used to remember all these various planes and the airline companies and their iconic liveries in the airports, so I pressured my mom into buying me these things, and here they are, 20 years later. I managed to find them in an old toy box. So what we're going to do is we're going to check out every single one of these. Of course, these are, at least most of them, especially this section here, from a company called Matchbox Skybusters. And the way you can tell that they're from that company is, first of all, they don't have a lot of detail. But secondly, if you already haven't noticed by now, check out the ginormous and out of proportion landing gear on them. I mean, they were clearly made for kids. These landing gears are so ridiculously large that they make the old generation Herpa landing gear look like realistic proportions. But anyway, let's not obsess about the landing gear. Let's check out the liveries and the planes, shall we? So we are going to begin with this first one here. And this right here is a Japan Airlines, old livery, of course, McDonnell Douglas DC-10. And the way you can tell that this is a DC-10 is, first of all, it is a trijet, right? But then the number 2 engine is not connected to the fuselage. There's like a little gap there. So that's how you know that this is a DC-10 and not that jet over there, which is also a trijet, but which is a Lockheed L1011. But I'll get to that in a second. Let's take a closer look at this Japan Airlines jet over here. You can see that we have the JAL, Japan Airlines logo, old livery, very rudimentary engine detail. And then if you look at the front, these Matchbox Skybusters were known for having like little recesses for the cockpit windows in the mold, but nothing was painted. Herpa and some of the other brands like Gemini Jets, etc., on the other hand, what they do is they don't have any kind of three-dimensional gaps in the mold, but instead they paint the cockpit windows in gray, and later on they also started adding cockpit window frames and windshield wipers as well, of course painted. But anyway, you can see that we have 4 exits here, and then this is the other side, and that would be the McDonnell Douglas DC-10. Let's move on to the next plane. And this one is an Alitalia Lockheed L1011, probably the L1011-100 because it has 4 exit doors instead of 3 like on the L1011-500. So the way you can tell that this is an L1011 is because the number 2 engine is fused with the fuselage, right? And this is also a trijet with the Alitalia livery from back in the day. Also looks really nice. in terms of livery, of course, not in terms of detail, because you can see that the number 2 engine, for example, doesn't even have any kind of fan blade detailing at all. And the engines as well are even worse looking than the Douglas DC-10's engines. And again, the cockpit windows have just little bars for the frames and nothing else. If you take a look at the bottom of this, this is where you will notice the gigantic landing gear. This is, of course, plastic. And these rear landing gears are held together by this metal rod here. And the plane itself is actually a 2-piece casting, like the fuselage. So it has this horrible gap that runs from the front all the way to the back. And it is held in place by this soldering. It's not even a screw that you can tighten. It's more like, I don't know what. But yeah. They still managed to get the basic shape of the plane. And these models, by the way, are 1/550 scale, right? They're not 1/500 scale, but they're also not 1/600 scale. They're somewhere in between. So yeah, this is the back of the L1011-100. And now let's move on to the next plane, which is this Qantas. And this is, I think that this is a Boeing 767, if you look at the nose. But it could also be a 777 or a 777 based on the number of exit doors, right? Like this looks like a 777-300, but it is a toy plane, so they might not be too accurate on the exact plane model. I love the Qantas livery though, with the big red kangaroo on the vertical stabilizer. And this is actually a fantasy plane. It's not even anything that I said, because you can see that we have here a row of windows at the top like you would find them on a Boeing 747. But this is not a 747. This is literally a fantasy plane. If it weren't for that row of windows, I would be saying it's either a 767 or maybe a 777, probably a 767. But with that window row, it's just ridiculous. I'm not sure what it is. But it still looks nice in terms of basic rudimentary livery, right? Alright, so that exact model is also used for this plane right here, which is a Lufthansa. Again, either a 777 or a 767, probably a 767, but this time with no row of windows at the top, so this looks more accurate to the real plane. And what I like about this plane is that the entire bottom of the plane is made out of metal, or I'd say painted in a metallic shine. I don't know if you can see that, because the other ones were all white at the bottom, as you can see over there. So the entire fuselage was white, but here it's like a dual color. That's some detail on the engines, although the cowlings are way too thick on this one. Again, no detail on the cockpit windows. But 4 doors, you have the German flag, and of course the Lufthansa logo, which is a crane. Look at that horrible gap right there. That's what I mean with these toy planes. They just don't pay any kind of attention when it comes to detailing the fuselage. And also, you have like this issue right here, which is, again, something absolutely not worth collecting. But hey, it's a childhood plane. And then we have the Singapore Airlines. Now this is a 747, and it is missing the front landing gear. And that's because I broke it off while I was playing with it as a kid. I probably thought that it was retractable and I tried to move it and then it broke off. But you can definitely tell that this is your classic 747 look. I think it is a 747 SP, which is like the shortest version of the 747. You can see the beautiful Singapore Airlines logo on the vertical stabilizer, as well as the blue and the yellow band running along the window line. The upper deck windows are painted in yellow for some reason. But yeah, it is what it is. And coming to another 747 in this collection of mine, and at least here we have the landing gear still intact. And this is a British Airways 747, probably also an SP. I think it's the exact same length as the other one. And if you look at the vertical stabilizer, you can see that this is based on the Landor livery of the British Airways, which is my favorite livery on the British Airways fleet. I'm not a big fan of the current one. So again, you can see that we have like this three-dimensional recess for the cockpit windows, but they are not painted and the frames are just too thick in between the windows. But they might look good if I paint the recesses in black or maybe in gray. I don't know. I might try doing that. Turbine detail is okay, I'd say. But yeah. And now we have some other planes. We're going to start with this one. This is made entirely out of plastic, and this is a Virgin Atlantic Airbus A380. The way you can tell it's an Airbus A380 is based on the dual row of windows running along the entire length of the fuselage. Now, I think that I actually got this plane while I was opening a Kinder Egg. Remember those little yellow things that they used to sell? Those chocolate eggs with the yellow plastic part in the middle where you had a random toy? That's where I actually got this. It's pretty cool because it comes with its own stand, and you can even change the angle of attack on the plane by moving the stand around. It's got red engines, and then of course we have Virgin written on the vertical stabilizer right there. And the livery looks pretty good, and this is so small that I measured it, and it's actually 1 to 1,000 scale. So all the others that you see over there were like 1 to 550. But this one is like 1 to 1,000. Anyway, so it looks pretty good. And now we move on to these diecast planes. These are slightly higher quality, and we're going to start perhaps with the Swiss Air over here. And this is, of course, completely covered in rust. And that's because it was kept in like a more humid environment. And this is supposed to be an Airbus A310 by Swiss Air. You can see it's got the wing fences. It says Swiss Air on it. And this is, of course, the old Swiss Air livery from the 80s and I think the early 90s. It's got a nice tail where you have the flag of Switzerland. And yeah, that's the Airbus A310 for you. And now moving on to the next one. This right here is an Emirates Boeing 777. Or also known as the 777. And you can see that it says so right here. You can zoom this in. And this plane is made by a company called Schabak. Back in the 90s, they used to make planes in 1/600 scale, which is like even smaller than 1/500 scale, which is pretty much considered the standard size of diecast plane collecting. Because there's also 1/400 scale, which is bigger and more expensive, but 1/500 is like the place where many people start off. But in the 90s, 1/600 used to be a lot more popular. And I measured this, so I know that this is not 1/500. So it's a 1/600 a Boeing 777 in the old Emirates livery. And back in the day, you can see that Schabak actually used to simply put a sticker along the fuselage of their planes instead of printing the details on. So over time, this sticker has sort of begun to peel off, and some of that livery is gone, although I did manage to take care of it as a kid, that I didn't erase the window line or anything like that. But the sticker yellowed out a little bit, while the fuselage remains white. So that's why I tried to sort of peel it off, thinking that the plane will get whiter in the process, not realizing that I'm peeling off the actual sticker livery. But that's how kids think, right? Anyway, it says Emirates both in Arabic and in English. And you also have the Emirates logo on the engines. And if this plane weren't 25 years old, it wouldn't have yellowed out, so it would look better. We then, of course, have the UAE flag on the vertical stabilizer. And I actually cleaned all of these models before doing my review on them, so they look pretty good. I managed to get them looking pretty white again. They were pretty off-white and dusty when I actually had them, sitting on my shelf for like 20 plus years. And I also painted a few missing areas that had scraped off on the black section of the flag in black, as well as on the green section, so it looks pretty good now. But yeah, that's the 777 for you. Underside, you can see these Schabak planes. Used to say Schabak right there. Also for this one I lost the front landing gear. They had a very basic landing gear design compared to Herpa. They were smaller in the 90s, but they were also very basic. It says Germany, so these planes used to be made in Germany back in the 90s before everything began to be made in China. And it says Boeing 777 right there. So yeah. And then we move on to a 1/600 scale Air India Boeing 747-200. So this is the slightly extended standard size fuselage compared to the 747 SP that I showed you earlier. And it's a 747-200 because the upper deck has more than 3 windows like the 100, and because it has no door like the 300, and the wings have no winglets like the 400. And of course, the old Air India livery was one of the prettiest in existence because you had this trim around every single one of the windows that made it look like a palace window. The thing is, the livery I think is not entirely accurate because it says Air India and Air India both in English, when in reality it was more supposed to look like this, where you have the English Air India branding and the Hindi Air India branding written in the Devanagari script in like one side of the fuselage, and it would be reversed on the other side. So you would have the Devanagari here and you would have the English lettering here on the other side. But on the other side you have Air India on both fuselage and vertical stabilizer. But anyway, apart from that, of course, these old Boeings used to be equipped with this black patch underneath the cockpit windows to reduce glare for the pilots. And otherwise, it is quite old, so again, the same issue with these Schabak planes was that they used to print the livery as a sticker running along the fuselage instead of actually printing it. And that's why it begins to peel off after many, many years, while the fuselage still remains white. But yeah, that's a 1/600 Air India 747-200 for you. Underside, of course. Real quick look. Schabak made in Germany. And finally, we come to this. This is a plastic Airbus A310 by Royal Jordanian, which unfortunately is missing its vertical stabilizer, JAL123 style, and that's because I lost it. But at least I managed to keep the rest of the plane in a pretty good condition. Of course, I cleaned it, so it looks good now. And you can see that we have the crown of Royal Jordanian down there. And I believe this is 1/200 scale, judging by the size of it. These are also worth collecting, although some collectors say that they look too plasticky because of the shine that they have on them compared to diecast. I mean, the detail level is still very good, and these don't cost a lot. So oftentimes you can find such huge plastic planes for roughly the same price as a 1/500 scale diecast plane. Of course, the engines don't have any fan blade detailing in them, and the quality of these 1/200 scale plastic models has improved over the years compared to the 90s, but this is what the 90s used to give you. Well, guys, that does it pretty much for this review. Now, this, of course, is not a collection. It's more like simply an assortment of planes that I had from my childhood and that I decided to show you for this video. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually really thinking about starting collecting diecast planes, like actual model planes that are collectors worthy. And if I don't want to spend too much money, I'm not going to start with 1/400 scale Gemini jets and all those, great castings that cost like 35 or 40 euros a plane. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some old Herpas. Perhaps they may have big landing gears, but they are smaller than these. But the livery and the plane details are a lot better than these. And they still only cost 8 or 10 euros per plane, if you know where to find them in Europe, and I do. So, over the course of the next couple of weeks, you might actually see some more plane reviews on my channel. Please don't unsubscribe, because I still collect diecast cars, and I'm very much willing to upload really cool car reviews over the course of this year, and more, of course. But every now and then I might include a plane review, just to sort of keep your interest also on some of the other collectibles the world of diecast has to offer. So thanks again, guys, for tuning in and watching this review of a bunch of planes. I didn't see many reviews on 1600 or 1550 Matchbox Skybusters, so I decided to make this one. Thanks for checking out my childhood planes, and I'll see you in the next review. Take care. This is Imperial Diecast, signing out.